Nomberg with another weekly episode of Nomberg Law Live. Thank you for joining us each Tuesday at 10 a.m. I try to bring interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And my guest this morning is Bruce Markusen. Good morning, Bruce.
Morning, Bernard. Glad to be with you.
Thank you. I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us. Bruce is currently at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, where he's the manager of digital and outreach learning. And Bruce, I'm just so thrilled with spring training having just begun and the onset of the season coming up that you had a few minutes to chat with me this morning. So I hope your day is going well so far.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice time of year. The spring training games are just underway as of the weekend. The days are getting a little bit longer. The sun is occasionally coming out here in Cooperstown, and the temperatures are getting a little bit warmer. It's moving into the 40s, so we're grateful for that.
Well, excellent. And it's the reason why I wanted us to have a conversation is really just because of that. Baseball being my favorite sport. We're in the middle of spring coming up. With the season really is 6-7 weeks from now or less,
Yeah.
The opening day. But Bruce, before we jump into all things baseball, if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at the Hall of Fame and Museum.
Well, I've worked off and on at the Hall of Fame since 1995. When I started here in the mid-90s, I actually worked in the library in the research department. I then switched over to public programs. I did that for a while. I then left the Hall of Fame 2004, did some other employment in this area, worked for the other museums. We have two other major museums in town, the Fenimore Museum and the Farmers Museum, which are just a stone's throw from here at the Hall of Fame. And then I came back full-time in 2013 in the education department. So I've been working in that department ever since. And I think this is really my true niche at the Hall of Fame, working with kids, helping to develop curriculum, also helping out with programs and special events as well.
Very good. Well, this may seem like a ridiculous question, but I have to ask it anyway. Are you a baseball fan?
Oh, absolutely. I've been a fan since the early 70s. My father was a huge fan of baseball. Mets fan, so I rebelled and became a Yankee fan. He would buy me baseball books every Christmas, sometimes for my birthday as well, so I'd learn the history of the game. But I've been a fan really from the earliest going that I can remember, 6, 7 years of age, and have been following the game ever since. Now, that's not to say that every employee here at the Hall of Fame is a diehard fan. Some are not. In some departments, it's really not relevant. Doesn't really necessarily matter if you're a fan. Certainly, though, in what I do, being a fan helps teaching about baseball history, and how it corresponds to the American curriculum for elementary and high school students. Certainly helps. If you know baseball, you can, I think, better teach it. So it does work out from that standpoint.
Very nice. Well, for people who've never been to Cooperstown, it's over the years you always hear, at least I hear, Hall of Fame, or I'm going to Cooperstown. What people may not realize is what facilities, what's actually there affiliated with Major League Baseball for people to come visit if they've never been and don't know much about it. What are you coming to?
Well, actually, we're not affiliated with Major League Baseball. You'll sometimes hear fans and media refer to this as the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, and that's a misnomer. It's not. We are the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We have the Hall of Fame, where we honor the great players. We have a museum, and we also have a library. But we do not have an official affiliation or connection to the major leagues. We are run independently of them. Now, that's not to say that we certainly, don't have a working relationship. We do work with them. We rely on Major League Baseball to help supply us with artifacts from history-making moments. We help the major leagues out during the playoffs and World Series. Some of our public relations staff will actually travel to the games. and they'll assist Major League Baseball public relations in a variety of ways. But it's really more of an informal relationship. So what we have here is an independent museum that examines the history of baseball, but also puts it within the context of American culture. The Hall of Fame itself is where we currently have 329 bronze plaques representing the greatest players, managers, umpires, owners in the history of baseball. So that's our plaque gallery, which is kind of the centerpiece to the buildings here. And then I'm actually up in the library in terms of where our offices are here in education. And so we have this archive, 40,000 baseball books, hundreds of thousands of photographs, millions of paper documents. All of that is collected and maintained here. We have files, for example, on anybody who's ever played in the major leagues, but also files on significant non-major leaguers as well, and that's part of our research facility here. So you have many things going on, but again, it's done in a way that is independent of the major leagues.
I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, and here in downtown we have the Negro League Southern Hall of Fame. Are you familiar with that one? I didn't know if there was any affiliations or connections between the various Hall of Fames or museums around the country with the one where you work.
We don't have a formal affiliation with the museum that you just mentioned. The Negro Leagues museum that I was more familiar with is the one in Kansas City, where they honor many of the great Negro Leagues players. The late Buck O'Neil was heavily involved in the development and the funding of that museum. We, again, don't have a formal affiliation with them. But certainly, we try to work together. There are times when we will have artifacts on loan from other museums that we will display here, maybe use as part of a temporary exhibit. And there are times when we'll loan out exhibits as well to other museums. But these are sort of done on a case-by-case basis.
I don't know the relationship between the Negro League Hall of Fame, the large one that you just spoke of that probably most people know, and the one that's here in Birmingham. I think the one in Birmingham is much smaller, and I think it concentrates on African American players who either played in the Negro Leagues or came up through the Southern League in Double-A baseball, which Birmingham has been a part of for over 100 years. But we can move on from there. Now, one other aspect about Cooperstown, and I don't know if it's related or have any affiliation with what you do, but I know that kids who are in their 11, 12, 13 years of age come to Cooperstown to play in tournaments it seems like all summer long. I didn't know if there was a relationship between the Hall of Fame and museum and what this baseball tournament is each year.
Again, that's an independent organization. It's been around since the mid-1990s. It's called the Cooperstown DreamSpark. It is about a 4-hour drive, not 4-hour, a 4-mile drive, more like 4 minutes or 5-minute drive from here in downtown Cooperstown. But up at the DreamSpark, they bring in, I believe it's 104 amateur teams a week. They are essentially 11 and 12-year-olds. They play a week-long tournament that culminates in a championship game. Many of the kids come through the museum because they have tickets to come to the Hall of Fame. So we'll see, large packs of the kids from the DreamSpark coming through. And I think one of the more interesting things about the DreamSpark is that we've actually had some future Major League stars that were there as 11 and 12-year-olds.
Wow.
Two of the most prominent names in baseball today, Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, both played at DreamSpark when they were 12. And, of course, they have gone on to become stars in the major leagues. Many would make the argument that Mike Trout is the best player in the game today. I suppose it'd be difficult to argue against that, although some might want to debate you. But and there have been a number of others, but those would be probably the two biggest names that are alumni of the DreamSpark. They basically start in late May and they go through early September. It's like a
Wow.
13-week season, and it's one of the reasons Cooperstown is very busy in the summer. We would, I guess, be the other reason.
Yeah. Well, that's over 1,000 amateur teams that come through every summer. If there's 104 a week, that's
Yeah,
amazing. That's
it
incredible.
is.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well, that is certainly one way to hopefully keep the sport of baseball alive for young teens, for young kids. I know that
yeah.
that's been an ongoing debate for probably a few decades now that the other sports have more splash or they're more vibrant. But I know that part of what you do at the Hall of Fame and Museum is you have an outreach program where you're educating, not just about baseball, but I want you to describe how you reach out to school children and what you do in those efforts to help promote the sport.
Well, one of the things that I do principally here is put together a video conference or virtual field trip program. So basically, for schools that cannot come here, it's too far away, or it's too much of a financial burden to visit the Hall of Fame, they are able to connect to us and do a virtual field trip. It's done sort of like what we're doing right now, though we use a different program. We use Field Trip Zoom. The kids see us, I see them, I can communicate with them in real time. We do 15 different educational units, but they're all done in a way that allows us to teach what is being taught in elementary schools and high schools around the country. So, for example, one of our most popular programs is called Civil Rights, before you could say Jackie Robinson. And what we do is we trace the civil rights history of baseball. We go back to a time when the sport was segregated, much like American society was segregated by Jim Crow laws. We talk about the start of the Negro Leagues in 1920. We've recently passed the 100th anniversary of Rube Foster officially starting the Negro Leagues. It was February 13th, 1920. We look at some of the great Negro League players like Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell. We also talk about some of the women who played in the league, and female owner, Effa Manley, who's actually a Hall of Fame member. And then we get into the subject of Jackie Robinson, who started his career with the Kansas City Monarchs, a Negro Leagues team, but got a chance to play in the major leagues, was signed, selected by Branch Rickey, broke the color barrier, and did so well that he essentially opened the door for other African-American players. But all of this, of course, ties into American history, the Jim Crow laws. We talk about the whole policy or notion of separate but equal. All of this directly correlates to American history. In many ways, Jackie Robinson was kind of Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks became famous in 1955. 11 years earlier, Jackie Robinson had been involved in a similar incident. He was on a military bus. He was a lieutenant of the U.S. Army. He was wearing his lieutenant's uniform, but he was told he had to sit in the back of the bus simply because of the color of his skin. He made a very cogent argument that, hey, I'm an officer in the U.S. Army. I should be able to sit wherever. The bus driver was not sympathetic to him. The two got into an argument. Jackie was arrested and went to military trial and was found completely not guilty on all the charges. So in many ways, baseball history reflects American history and American culture. So we examine these different aspects of baseball, but we tie it in to what is taught in American schools today. We do a math program, Batter Up, where we teach the kids how to figure out batting average, slugging percentage. We have a cultural diversity program where we look at the contributions of Latino players, Native American players, Asian players. We have a Science on the Sandlot program where we look at the whole process of the bat meeting the ball and how this is indicative of science in action. We examine the laws that Isaac Newton came up with, the laws of motion, and how baseball is really kind of a perfect vehicle to study things like that. So we have 15 different programs. And again, we kind of use baseball as the lens through which we can extend the kids and their learning at various levels. We start at third grade. We do programs through high school, and we've even in the last 5 or 6 years tinkered a little bit or experimented a little bit with some college-related programs. So we've done that as well. So that's one of the primary things that we do. We also do outreach with local schools in our geographic region. We help put on public events. For example, we had a reunion of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League in September of last year. And we actually interviewed some of the former players from the league. It was a great educational opportunity. We did an afternoon program, or I think it was a morning program with some local students from 3 or 4 different schools, and they actually got to come out, listen to the program, and meet some of the players from the All-American Girls League from 1943 to 1954. So this is all part of what I do in terms of outreach here at the Hall of Fame.
Well, I think those are fantastic programs, and may I suggest, Bruce, because all of this geared for students, I would hope that there at least is and being considered on an adult learning level. So many of these topics are fascinating. They could easily be translated to me, and I would be one of your first signups to attend those. And being
well, it's interesting.
Birmingham,
It's interesting you mention that because we do programs for senior adults as well, assisted living facilities, rehabilitation centers, other facilities with folks, in their 60s, 70s, 80s, in some cases a bit older. Some of the programs that we do actually, translate to the senior level of learning. Our civil rights program, cultural diversity. We do a fun one, pop culture through baseball cards, American history through baseball uniforms. So, yeah, some of our programs do work at the adult level, too. Absolutely.
very good. Well, I'm in Birmingham, and just 100 miles to the south of us is Montgomery, obviously the home of the civil rights and where everything really culminated with Miss Parks. But
Yes.
those type of programs, I would hope that in my region of the country that people have reached out to you guys to have some of these learning experiences. And if people who are watching this, Bruce, are interested, who do they reach out to, and how do they contact the museum and Hall of Fame to be able to start that dialogue to get on the schedule potentially?
Yeah, Bernard, probably the easiest way is to go to our website. It's baseballhall.org, baseballhall.org. And right on the homepage, there is a tab for our education program. And if you click through those tabs, you'll find our distance learning, which I often refer to as video conferencing or virtual field trips. But if you go to the distance learning tab, you can see the different programs that we offer. And if there's one that strikes the interest of a teacher, the teacher can then submit a registration form. So that is one way to do it. The other way is for folks to contact me directly. Probably the best way to do that is via email. And my email address is, I'll spell it out, BMARKUSEN, that's B Markusen, at baseballhall.org. So bmarkusen@baseballhall.org. Send me an email. I'll send you the information that you're looking for, and if it's something that a school feels fits with what they're doing curriculum-wise, and if it's something that they feel is affordable, and generally it is more affordable to do a video conference than it is to do a school bus visit to a place like the Hall of Fame. But if financially it's within the school's means, we're happy to talk to them, and we can even occasionally offer some assistance, some discounts to schools that are in need. And if schools are willing to commit to do, let's say, 3 programs, we'll do a 4th one free. So there are ways to kind of work around some of these financial parameters.
Oh, fantastic. And I'll put those links in the comments section below our video from today. And for those of you just joining us, I'm having a conversation with Bruce Markusen. He is the manager of digital and outreach learning with the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. And the way I came across you about a year and a half ago, Bruce, was through the great courses. And
Yeah.
I got to listen and watch the play ball history of
Hmm.
baseball, that you were the narrator or the MC, if you will. Explain a little bit about that course and that just really fascinating set of programs that you did.
Well, that's a program that was kind of put together, a coordinated effort between the great courses people and the folks here at the Hall of Fame. And I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be the narrator, or as some say, the professor for the program. Some people are actually calling me professor, a la the character from Gilligan's Island, which is kind of funny. I don't really consider myself a professor, but I'll take that as a nickname. But I narrated the programs. There are 24 half-hour programs, all related to 19th century baseball, also early 20th century baseball, those formative years for the game. We actually recorded those. I think I was telling you about this off air. We recorded those in January of 2019, so it was about a year ago. And essentially, in the span of 3 days, we recorded the 24 programs. And then later on, the great courses people, they did a lot of editing. They incorporated photographs of the museum, photographs of artifacts, and other visual tools. But that was quite a marathon. I had really never used a teleprompter before. Everything was scripted out for me to read. But getting used to a teleprompter was an interesting learning experience, and just the experience of, sitting down and, cranking out all of these programs. Luckily, the way that they do it is, if you stumble within a paragraph, you say or you say a word mispronounce. All you have to do is go back to the preceding paragraph. It's not like you have to go all the way back to the beginning. So that did expedite things quite a bit. If you had to go way back to the beginning, it would have taken several months to complete it. But we got it done in 3 days, and people seem to enjoy the programs that are still out there, still available through the great courses. I know at one point last year it was the best-selling course among their new offerings. That may have changed a little bit since some time has passed, but the program has been out, I want to say, since about June of last year. So it's created a bit of a stir, and people do seem to like them. Occasionally, I'll get an email from people saying, challenging us on a fact or a piece of interpretation, and I have to very kindly say to the people, I'm just the narrator. I didn't write them. And then we'll forward it on to our curators who were involved in that process, and they'll try to explain exactly why it is that we wrote what we did. But they are factually accurate. History is always open to some level of interpretation, but these were rigorously fact-checked, and so I'm very confident that what was fed to me over the teleprompter was very much on the money.
Well, for those who aren't familiar with this, the official title is Play Ball, The Rise of Baseball as America's Pastime. And a few of the chapters that I'll tell you, there's the first one is Ground Rules, Baseball Before Babe Ruth. The Dawn of Professional Baseball. Baseball Grows by Hitting the Road. Prejudice and Diversity in Early Baseball. And it ends, let's see, the last chapter is How Changing Baseballs Changed. Let me see the title. Or do you remember the name of this title? I can't.
I don't offhand.
Okay,
Yeah.
but here's one. Here's one I do want to talk about, and this is going to bring us into the modern time, Bruce. Scandals and Deception on the Diamond.
Yeah.
Now, that was one of the chapters, but here's my question, and I know history will bear this out, but it's certainly open for debate currently. Obviously, it's the Astros issues from the last couple of years. Now, one of the debates that I had this past week with another baseball buddy of mine is how does the Astros scandal, if you will, compare to the Black Sox from the 1919 World Series? Which one is worse? Or can you compare the two? Do you have an opinion on that? I certainly do, but nobody wants to hear from me. They want to hear from you.
Yeah.
And what's your thoughts?
Well, I can certainly offer a personal opinion. The scandals are not really the same. They're opposite ends of the spectrum. You have the Black Sox, the White Sox of 1919, who were intentionally, or at least some of them, were intentionally trying to lose the World Series in order to fulfill a deal that was made with gamblers prior to the series. And then in the Astros scandal, you have a team going to the other extreme, doing whatever it takes to win, even though clearly you have violated the rules. And in this particular case, no connection with gamblers, certainly not that we know of. I think they're both pretty bad and both difficult for the game. Right now, baseball is dealing with the aftermath of that, the Astros' arrival at spring training. How they have handled or not handled the situation has been a dominant theme of the spring. And I think it's something that's probably going to continue to be brought up once the regular season starts. When the Astros play their first road games, how the fans in opposing ballparks receive them is going to be very interesting. How other teams receive them, there's already been talk about inside pitches being thrown at the Astros as a retaliation for what they did. So this periodically is going to come up. I think eventually it's going to fade a little bit, but it's not going to fade away completely, and it shouldn't. It's an important chapter in baseball history. Was a clear violation of the rules. We're still waiting to hear about the Red Sox, any punishment that may be coming down to them for a similar sign stealing scandal. So it is something that should be talked about. It is a serious blemish, if you will, for baseball, and it's one that baseball is going to have to deal with. My hope, though, is that this all comes out of Mike Fiers, a pitcher who I feel was pretty brave in coming out with what he said, the whistleblower, so to speak. He's been criticized. I think he should not be criticized. I think he should be praised for what he's done. Because if not for him, this would not have come out. Major League Baseball would not have reacted. And we would not have essentially a new system in place now where I think you're going to see Major League Baseball with extra security and extra personnel at the ballparks to make sure this kind of thing does not continue to go on. So it's going to lead to a resolution. It's going to lead to a better and cleaner game. But because of the scandal and the effects that it may have had the last 2-3 seasons, baseball's got to take its lumps. And we're going through that right now.
Well, it's between Fiers now getting death threats and other ball players or either current or former ball players, big names as well, criticizing Fiers. There's a guy, Mike Bolsinger, has sued the Astros over the sign stealing. But I think one of the big differences to me, sign stealing has always been part of the game, of course. There's always I've always heard that Bobby Thompson's home run in '51 was a product of sign stealing. But to me, the biggest difference now is the use of technology or batteries or whatever artificial means, as opposed to the way, I don't know, that it was, because I guess, 70 years ago, they didn't have any of that technology, but it's always an evolving part of the game that you never stay in front of from a major league, the commissioner's office. But here's the other thing I was going to ask you. This now affects many teams. Unlike the Black Sox in the World Series, that was just really affecting two teams, to my knowledge, the winner and the loser of the World Series. But this is much more involved because it was throughout the season. Obviously, more and more players are coming forth and placing blame. I just hope, for baseball's standpoint, they do find some resolution. They do find some proper way to deal with it. But it really is a shameful part of because those players involved are um, they're such good players. It really is just maybe that just shows you the fine line now with the pressure that's out there of winning and losing and all the money that's at stake. I don't know. It just tarnishes the sport all around.
I always tell people when we're talking about professional sports, the aim is to win. It's not enough just to try hard. You're being paid to play at a high level, and your goal is to win. Initially to make the playoffs, then win playoff series, and then get to the World Series and win that. But unfortunately, what's happened, and we've seen this really over the last 20 or so years now, first with steroids, now with the sign stealing scandal, is the mentality of winning no matter what, winning at every cost, winning even if it means breaking the rules, cheating the system, doing yourself bodily harm. And that's the problem. And I think fans have become tired of that. I mean, we all have teams that we root for. I've been a fan of the Yankees for many, many years, and I want to see them do well. But if you told me that, the only way they're going to win the World Series is if they, steal the signs through technology, well, I'm not interested in that. If that's what it takes, they're not good enough, then they're not good enough. They finish second or third or fourth or whatever. That's fine. You do everything you can within the rules, within the bounds of reason, within the bounds of the law, and you make your best effort. You keep yourself in condition. You play hard. You try to play smart. And if you win, great. If not, you fall short. Well, it's not the end of the world. And I think we just have to get away from this philosophy of winning at every possible cost. Clearly, it's something the fans don't want. I think it's something the game doesn't want. And I think the players and the managers and the front offices, maybe now they understand that. And hopefully, hopefully this is not going to continue as a practice. I'm sure there have been other teams involved, but hopefully in the future, we're not going to see this kind of sign stealing using technology. If you can steal signs from second base as a player, from the coaching boxes, if you're first base or third base coach, that's one thing. That's perfectly allowable. There's actually a skill. There's an art to that. But if you use technology, use video, that is clearly beyond the scope of the rules. And that is something that we cannot permit. And I think baseball understands that now. The art of sign stealing has probably allowed marginal or diminishing skills players to actually stay in the game longer. Oh, yeah.
Over the overtime period. But I hope that, it seems like every decade or every period of time in Major League Baseball history is defined by an issue, the dead ball era or the steroids era. I just hope that this issue does not define this era, the 2010s. I'm not sure if you say it the 2010s, but whatever, this decade. Yeah. But let's pivot away from that and get on to something a little bit better. And I sure appreciate your time and sharing some of your background and your experiences here, Bruce. But let's talk about one of the fairly new exhibits at the Hall of Fame and Museum, Shoebox Treasures. This really gets to me right here. So tell us, for those who don't know, what is Shoebox Treasures?
Well, it's our brand new baseball card exhibit, which opened up Memorial Day weekend of last year. Some people that had been to the Hall of Fame years ago might remember we had a baseball card exhibit that was up on the third floor. And this is going back 80s, 90s, early 2000s. It wasn't a real detailed exhibit. It was basically kind of a display of different cards from different eras. I think there was some cards from each year of Topps, but there wasn't a lot of historical context. There wasn't much of a narrative to it. It was really more of a display than a full-fledged exhibit. And one of the things that the curators here wanted to do was to create a true exhibit, a themed exhibit, something that really explored all the different aspects, the production of cards, how they got started, how they used to be issued with tobacco and then candy products and then eventually with gum, the Topps monopoly, the importance of people like Jefferson Burdick, one of the great individual collectors of baseball cards, the importance of people like Cy Berger, who was the driving force at the Topps company for so many years, the efforts of Woody Gelman, who came up with the designs for the cards for Topps, did such great work for many years. We wanted to really explore the history of baseball cards, just as we explore, the history of the Negro Leagues, the history of women in baseball, the history of Latinos in baseball, just as we explore things like the Black Sox scandal, the World Series. We wanted to do something that really gave baseball card collecting a true and a fitting exhibit, and I think we've put that together. It's up on the third floor here at the museum. If you're a baseball card collector like me, it's definitely a must-see. One of the really cool things that we have is we actually have a bicycle spoke, and you can actually crank the bicycle spoke to recreate the former pastime. It was very popular in the 50s and 60s of putting your baseball cards in the spokes of the wheel of your bikes, because it made that cool flapping sound as you're riding your bike along in your neighborhood. So it's got some really good interactive elements. I was actually on the committee that helped put it together, so I had some ideas that I was able to contribute, as did all of our curators. And it took a couple of years to put it together, but I think it's a real nice exhibit, and one that is a must-see. If you're a collector, if you have interest in baseball cards, it's a real passion for me. I'm a collector. And here at the Hall of Fame, we have about 200,000 baseball cards. So it's an opportunity to display some of the best ones and to explore what is a very interesting history of baseball card collecting, which in some ways is almost as popular as the game itself.
Fantastic. Well, Bruce, I look forward to seeing that in an upcoming visit to Cooperstown in a few months.
Yeah,
for me.
And it's a permanent exhibit. It's not just temporary. It's a permanent part of the Hall of Fame, again, up on our third floor.
Very good. Well, I know with baseball cards being a passion of yours, you do a lot of writing. I know you've written several books, Orlando Cepeda, the Oakland A's, the Charlie Finley era, Roberto Clemente. Do you have any other current books that are in the works? Either you've already started writing, or maybe they're just in your head that you want to talk about?
I don't really have anything that, in terms of a baseball book, that's right on the immediate burner. I would love at some point to put together a book featuring all the Card Corner articles, or the best of the Card Corner articles. That's a feature that I did for a number of years here at the Hall of Fame. I've also written Card Corner for some other website as well. I'd love to gather those best of Card Corners and put them together in a book. If there's any publishers that are out there, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. But that would be something I would really love to do. But I do continue to write about baseball cards. I write for the Hardball Times, a website that's affiliated with Fangraphs. I have done a Card Corner feature here regularly. Currently, I'm on a bit of a break from doing that, at least for now. But who knows, that is something I may continue doing in the future. But I find baseball cards fascinating. So I think that would be the next logical book if someone is interested in publishing it. I'm not one for self-publishing, so if there's someone out there that knows a good publisher, give me a call.
Well, who knows who may hear this in the future? So maybe there'll be a publisher out there. And Bruce, we're getting close to the end of our conversation. And again, I thank you for your time. And for those of you just joining us, I'm with Bruce Markusen with the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We're talking a lot of stuff about the museum and baseball and history. And while we're not going to talk about individual candidates for election to the Hall, I do want to take a few minutes and talk about, and people may not know about, the rules for being elected to the Hall
Yeah.
of Fame. Can you kind of run through that with us for a few minutes?
Well, the ballot that most people think of when they think of the Hall of Fame is the ballot that's put together by the Baseball Writers Association of America. And that election is held every January. Just recently produced two new Hall of Famers, Derek Jeter and Larry Walker. Essentially, to be placed on that ballot, you must be a retired player. You have to have been retired for 5 full seasons. Then you have to have played at least 10 years in the major leagues. Even then, you still have to go through a bit of a screening process. So if you were like a utility player or maybe a middle reliever, not to say that you were a bad player, but generally utility players, middle relievers, are not Hall of Famers. So they might not go onto the ballot. The screening committee kind of sifts through that. But they do look at players who have had really significant 10-year careers where they were stars for a good part, if not all, of their career. And then those players get placed onto the ballot. In order to stay on the ballot, you have to get at least 5% of the vote. So that's where you have some holdovers. But the goal for anybody that's on the ballot is to get 75% of the vote. And that's not easy because you're talking about anywhere from 300 to 500 members of the baseball writers who vote each year. And trying to get a 75% consensus when you have that many writers is not easy to do. Of course, there was one writer who did not vote for Derek Jeter. A lot of people thought he was going to be unanimous. Turned out not to be the case. Larry Walker ended up getting, I think, just over 76%. So he just beat the threshold of 75%. But whether it's 76% or 99%, you're still a Hall of Famer either way. And that cannot be changed. Anybody that was on the ballot this past year that got 5% can return to the ballot for next year. You can be on the baseball writers ballot for up to 10 years. If you're on that ballot and don't make it into the Hall of Fame, you can then go to what used to be called the Veterans Committee. Now we call them era committees. And there's several different era committees that look at ball players from different eras in history. And those committees rotate. They kind of take turns doing elections in December. It's a 16-person committee that will consider those candidates. Also, they'll consider managers, umpires, and executives, because managers, umpires, and executives, they're never on the ballot for the baseball writers. The baseball writers only look at players. So these non-playing personnel, they have a chance through the various era committees. And it's also a 75% standard. 16 members vote, and you want to get 12 out of 16 in order to get into the Hall of Fame. And that's what Marvin Miller and Ted Simmons were able to do in December in the most recent committee election or era election that took place. So that's how we comprise each class. There's the baseball writers ballot, there's the era committee ballot, and this year we have 2 from each. So we have 4 new Hall of Famers coming in, and they'll be showing up in late July for this year's induction. We do have one deceased member, Marvin Miller, the head of the Players Association, who died several years ago, but he'd been considered for many, many years, finally got in through the era committee this year. So it's kind of in a nutshell, that's the process. And I like to say, and I think it's accurate, that the standards for the Baseball Hall of Fame are tougher than all the other sports. In football, it's a fine Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. I've been there. But they put in 5 people minimum each year, no matter what their vote totals are. The 5 highest vote getters at minimum get in, sometimes more. This year they actually had a special 20-person election because it's the 100th anniversary of the NFL. But in baseball, there is no such minimum. If you don't get 75%, you do not get in. So it doesn't matter if you're the top vote getter, you've got to get 75% or more. And we don't round up. So if you get 74.8, unfortunately, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. it's got to be a pure 75%. So the standards are very, very tough. If you can make it to the Baseball Hall of Fame, you have really eclipsed the highest standards that are out there for sports halls of fame.
Well, Bruce, with less than 350 members in the Hall of Fame, out of 100 and almost 50 years of Major League or organized professional baseball,
Yeah.
I would dare say the percentages of going into the Hall of Fame have got to be so minuscule that it really is such a unique club to belong to.
Yeah, if you look at just the major league players, there are, I'm going to guess, somewhere around 250 or so major league players that have been elected to the Hall of Fame. In the history of the major leagues, there have been over 19,000 players. So if you do the math, you're talking about 1% that get in. 1% of the major league players, equivalent of 4 major league rosters. So think about, seeing 4 major league teams play. Mathematically, 1 out of those 100 players that you're watching in a given day are going to make the Hall of Fame. And it is a very, very difficult standard.
And out of that 250, how many are New York Yankees or Highlanders, part of the Yankees organization? Probably the highest percentage.
Yeah, the Yankees do have the highest number of Hall of Famers. I don't know the exact number offhand. But the St. Louis Cardinals are also well represented. The Brooklyn Los Angeles Dodger franchise, well represented. There have been a number of New York and San Francisco Giants that are in the Hall of Fame.
Is every organization represented now in the Hall of Fame?
Well, in terms of, there have been alumni from all 30 teams.
But maybe not
made the
hats.
Hall of Fame. That's right. That's right. So, for example, take a guy like Wade Boggs.
Right.
Wade Boggs played for the Tampa Bay Rays at the end of his career. But he is in the Hall of Fame, I believe, as a Boston Red Sox. And, of course, he's best remembered as a Red Sox and as a Yankee.
Sure.
In terms of the cap, the logo that's represented on the cap on their Hall of Fame plaque, that's a little bit of a different story. And there are a couple of teams that have yet to put someone in the Hall of Fame in that capacity.
Sure.
Although that'll probably change over time. You'll never see a Seattle Pilot in the Hall of Fame because they only existed for 1 year. But it's a little bit different for the Milwaukee Brewers, who succeeded them. You've got Robin Yount and Paul Molitor, among others. So, yeah, not every team is represented in terms of a Hall of Famer, at least not at this point, because you have to consider expansion. Some of the teams relatively recent. But, yes, every one of the teams is represented in terms of having had a player play at least part of one season for their franchise. Yeah.
All right.
In that sense, they qualify.
Last 2 or 3 quick questions. Being a baseball card fan and collector, I would assume most all of your life. Favorite card? Not necessarily your most valuable, but your favorite card. Do you have 1 or 2 that really stand out in your collection to you?
I think probably my favorite card has become Roberto Clemente 1972 Topps card. Clemente was my favorite player. I only saw him a little bit toward the end of his career, but he became fascinating to me because my mother was Puerto Rican, born in Puerto Rico. And when I found that out, I immediately became a Clemente fan. And, of course, I was very young when he died, but I've since studied him, followed him, written a couple of books about him. So the 1972 card, it's not the last card that came out. They did put out posthumously a card in 73. But I really like the 72 set for a couple of reasons. It was the first year I collected cards. I was 7 years old. That was really the first year I went to the store and bought cards on a regular basis. And I just think it's a cool shot of Clemente. It's a shot of him probably before a game at Shea Stadium in New York, Pirates-Mets game. And he's just flipping a ball up in the air. And you can see the ball is in midair. And he's got his hand down here. It's a very cool shot of a cool player, heroic figure, great humanitarian. So that's probably my favorite card of all time, 1972 Roberto Clemente. But a lot of other cards I like too, but that's at the top of the list.
The fact you were able to narrow it down to one card speaks volumes. He really is. And I know you wrote so eloquently about him in your book, which I read. All right, last question for you.
Sure.
Favorite baseball memory? Whether playing as a child, attending a game, meeting a certain player, or an experience that really just is one of those things that kind of takes you back and you think about it from time to time.
I think as a baseball fan, 1978 when the Yankees played the Red Sox in that one-game playoff, that tiebreaker at Fenway Park, that was a remarkable experience. I had to stay late at school that day because I had intramural soccer, which I wasn't happy about because I wanted to get home early to try to watch the game. And I ended up getting home very late after intramural soccer. Actually, I had to take a cab home because both my parents worked in the city. There was no other way for me to get home. So my parents arranged for a cab to pick me up at school. And the cab driver drops me off in my driveway. I just run up the driveway, up to the second floor, turn on the TV, and literally turn on the television at the moment when Carl Yastrzemski is at bat. And I think it was maybe 2 or 3 pitches later, he ends up popping the ball up to Greg Nettles, who catches the ball down the third base line to end the game. It was, to me, one of the most exciting games. We'd listen to part of the game on the radio at school when we could, and just frantically getting home and watching the end of it. I don't know if there's ever any more pressure on a team to win because it's a one-game situation, and if you lose, you're not even considered a playoff team. You're not even a postseason team. There was no wild card back then as a consolation prize. And if you win, well, now you have a chance to play in the championship series and then play in the World Series. So everything was on the line, and I can only imagine the pressure on the players. I felt tremendous pressure as a fan. And for them to win and for me to just get home to watch the end of it, Yastrzemski against Gossage, 2 Hall of Famers, I guess that's a favorite memory for me.
Well, that's such a standout game, really, for any baseball fan, but particularly Yankees and Red Sox fans. But my 2 favorite players were playing in that game. Thurman Munson, the catcher, obviously, for the Yankees.
Yeah.
And probably one of the greatest pitching seasons in the last 50 years, Ron Guidry.
Yes.
25-3 that year, started the game for the Yankees. Well, yeah. Bruce, I could talk to you for the next 2 days, but we both have a lot of things to do. But I certainly want to thank you for all of your time, your expertise in sharing what you do. I know it is a job, but it is also a passion that you have. It comes out in all of the work that you do. And I thank you again, and I look forward to coming by to say hello if you happen to be there when I come to visit up in Cooperstown later this spring.
Absolutely. When you come by, give me a call. We'll take you around. It's been a lot of fun. I thank you for Bernard for having me on the program and allowing me to talk about being a baseball fan, but also being an educator in baseball. And it all kind of comes together here at the Hall of Fame. It
certainly does. And guys, thank you as always for tuning in to NOMBERG Law Live each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Interesting people in their areas of expertise, and Bruce certainly fits the bill today, especially if you're a baseball fan. Guys, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we will catch you another time. Be well.